Conversation between Bakari Kitwana and DBR, and I'm gonna just introduce Bakari. He's our artist in residence at the Race Center this year. He's author of number of books, former editor of the Source magazine. He's been around campus at a number of events, and he'll also be featured at a number of other events throughout the year, but we're really happy to have him be a part of this event, and let's just give a big hand to
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah, we're going to be kind of informal. So DBR, you all needs no introduction. He's going to come out and play a little bit for us, and then we're going to just chop it up a little bit and take some questions and take it from there. All right? Yeah, okay. I'm giving you the floor.
Oh, black men can be big-winded. Lots to say.
So when did you decide you was going to start freaking it like that?
Oh, freaking it like that? Good question. When did I decide? Well, as an artist, it takes a long time to find your voice, and then I think it takes an even longer time to become proficient in that voice. So there's a lot of tricks and notes for scandal, if you will. But I think that as I get older, I get a little more confident in what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, and the things I don't have to say. You know, I think this says it better. You make choices. How are you going to live in the world, make your peace with the world? And what's that movie, Atonement? Have you seen that yet? Excellent, excellent movie. So I'm, you know, a product of Haiti and Harlem and the Catholic Church even, and the Baptist Church. So I think, and you know, America, right? So I think if you know Jimmy Carter and Jimi Hendrix, right, and Barack Obama, I mean everything is, I think, reflective of the language I'm trying to speak with this little fiddle.
So at what point in your formative classical education did you decide that you were going to start breaking out?
The summer between 5th grade and 6th grade.
Pretty early.
Yeah, but that's a particular time. It's hard for us to remember, but let's try to remember. It's that moment you're about 10 or 11 years old, maybe 12, you know, and you're on the cusp of understanding. I remember taxes and mortgage and finances. I had a summer job, and at the same time, you know, along with maybe bad skin, bad hair, you discover the consequences of bad behavior. At least I did. And not to say that those consequences are necessarily, that's the connotation of the word. So maybe I should say the effects of bad behavior. And by bad behavior, I mean, you know, you're taught to play violin. You know, very... And then, you know, so what's bad about, you know... I remember I had a music teacher who said, you know, any monkey can do. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, she said monkey. And I took it as a racist statement. I did.
There it was.
I mean, there was nothing, I mean, I know what she was trying to get at. She was trying to get at something mechanical.
Right.
But she used that word. That's the difference, I think, sometimes in a classroom. You know, and this is a diverse place. This is South Florida. She certainly did not mean it that way. She meant mechanical, but I heard monkey. And she said to me, okay, so I want you to play your scales with as much humanity as you can. And I remember that was such an incredible moment because, well, what she meant was, you know, she immediately gave an example. And she did something like, you know, and she went on, talked, and then, you know, a few minutes later she went, and I understood. I said, oh, okay, so it's not just about the scale or the words, you know, the language that we use, and I can pick on you too, you know. It's just, it's this incredible notion of, as a writer, I would like to consider, as a composer, so I try to be a writer. You know, as a writer, you're constantly kind of telling stories, or telling things, that the truths. This is how things should be. And, you know, the words that you choose and how you choose to say things, I think. It's not just the words that you choose, but the words, how you say the words that you choose, you know. We can all say, this, you know, oh, say, can you see? You know, we can all sing that, but it's the way that you sing it. You know, that's what made, I think, Jimi Hendrix's rendition, which was just an improvisation, you know, so powerful. Is that there was something about it that was, for the time, I think, defiant and funky and black, and just, have you ever really heard it? A lot of people haven't actually heard the whole. If you get a chance, you know, I really like the total version because it's incredibly, there's a lot of noise. I mean, just snarling, you know. I remember it was morning. I think it was 6:30 in the morning. Remember, it was early in the morning, real early, you know, maybe 9. Yeah. Anyways.
I was watching some of the YouTube videos of you with my son, who's 9, and just
you're
started,
a father.
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow.
And he just started playing the violin this year.
Oh.
He's been playing the piano since he was 3, and so he saw the way you were holding the violin, and he's like, "You're not supposed to hold the violin like that." And then he saw you. I think it was on something you were doing in Australia. I think you had the bow in your mouth.
Yeah.
He's like, "You're not supposed to have the bow in your mouth." But seeing him see you was the first time I really, like, he just kind of lit up with the violin. He hadn't lit up like that before. I think he kind of saw that he could really do what he wanted to do with it, as opposed to follow all the rules. And so he says, "Why is he able to do that?" So he's a composer. He can do what he wants to do. And he liked that idea. How do you see when you're performing? How do you see children reacting who are musicians?
Oh, I'm trying not to forget my own childhood, and I'm not a father. That's why I probably had these paternal instincts, mid-30s crisis coming. But I'm trying to hold on to my childhood because, wait till you hit 40s. That's what it's there. I think. Well, there we go again. You know, what's the adage? You know, learn the rules so you can break them better. That's what I was getting at, right? So. I think that when I see children in the audience, I feel that sense of, well, I feel a debt and a responsibility, because the fact of the matter is I'm where I am because of a lot of opportunities and what I call a recycling of opportunity or recycling of compassion. You know, in the music business, it's not just about being nice, but it's a sense of compassion, because this is a kind of a vicious industry. And I'm sure, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure tort law and law school and business school and I'm sure the automotive industry, I'm sure every industry has its own viciousness, but I'm a musician, and the music business for sure is a vicious business. So that's what I mean by this recycling of compassion. I've been given a lot of opportunities, both in my education and in terms of performance and business. I run a production company. So when I see a younger person, whether they're 7 or 70, you know, I really try to lead by example. I think that's the best I can do. So I'm even a little bit like, you know, tell your son, you know, he really does have to stand up straight. And even if he sees me, you know, I always tell this to young musicians, it's always 90 degrees. So even if I'm cocked like this, you know, it's still 90 degrees and I'm cocked at. And that's a big difference. It's never, you know, that looks weird, right? So it's still 90 degrees. And that really has to do with how the instrument resonates in your arms. This is going to, you know, sometimes you want to kill the sound. So even this is, you know, it's just a parlor trick. And the thing about the mouth, that's a necessity. You know, because I want to do stuff like... So I need both hands, and I can't really... Well, you see the problem. Right. So it's and it looks good, sure, but it's a practical necessity. So,
what do you think has been the classical music industry response to you taking it out the way you do from the tradition?
Very positive. I mean, I make my living as a composer, not as a hip hop producer, not as a black star in commercial music. And I used to be ashamed of that because I think I wanted to be Pharrell or Kanye. I won't lie, you know. But I'm proudly a composer in the tradition of maybe Quincy Jones. Remember Quincy Jones and Alicia Keys and that wonderful rendition they did on the Grammys? I don't know if you saw it. What's that song? Well, whatever. It was really an amazing thing because he did the orchestral arrangement of her song. And there's a wonderful moment where the song kind of stops and there's this wonderful timpani hit. And if you look at the orchestra, they're all older black musicians who probably back in the day were doing, who knows, Motown records or, you know, Ray Charles records, who knows. But the fact is, you know, I think it's very important that I'm an advocate. I'm an advocate for classical music, and I'm a composer in the tradition of Duke Ellington, Nina Simone. And I think those are the kind of words and phrases that I need to be very public and adamant about, because you know, just like everybody else, I watch MTV and VH1 and, you know, the commercial music industry of please come in, of hip hop music and everything else it's powerful, it's overwhelming, you know, and classical music doesn't seem to have that. Well, it doesn't really need that clout, but I think that, as I like to say, you know, a few years ago, if you said the word golf, who would you think of? Well, in my lifetime, I don't think anybody in this room cannot think about the person we're all thinking about. And he happens to, now that's an icon. That, to me, is the definition of an icon. And it's wonderful that golf has an iconic figure that in so many ways defies the tradition of that particular sport.
Right.
Same thing for tennis, you know. And if you're really hip to golf, by the way, maybe it's not, maybe you're thinking of an Asian woman, by the way, not a black man. Michelle, right? So to me, that's powerful, and I think classical music, you know, we have that, by the way, we have that tradition. You know? We had our Marian Anderson, we have our Jesse Normans, you know, we have our Wyclef Gordon or Wynton Marsalis or Bobby McFerrin, Andre Watts. Andre Watts, man, woo! See, now that is a hip-hop record waiting to happen. Alicia Keys and Andre Watts. Oh, you know what I'm saying? I mean, or Wadajin Pratt. Do you know who? Well, heavy, man. That's heavy. I'll go to I'm going to write a blog on that actually. Okay. That's heavy. Yeah.
So you kind of moved into the pop music. I want to talk some about music. I was going to save it for later. The pop music, but I want to talk about race, since this is the race center. And I think that you kind of touched on race, talking about Tiger Woods, and I think that you're kind of doing something similar, except for you're acknowledging your blackness.
Woo!
But and I think that you do it very fiercely, and I think you do it in a way that contradicts or at least challenges people's ideas of blackness or what blackness should be. But at the same time, you're not apologizing for it. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, for me, it began in Nashville. And I was an undergraduate student at Vanderbilt University, and I was a little bit ashamed of myself because I was a freshman student, 20-something years old, and I realized I didn't really know any other contemporary black composers. I couldn't name peers, let alone, you know, and there had to, all I knew was that there had to have been. And I started doing some minimal research, and I came across the Center for Black Music Research right over here at Columbia College, I think. Columbia University? Columbia College. I'm from New York. Columbia College. And there were two important names that came up, Sam Floyd and Dominique Renee Delerma. Very important African-American scholars on black music. And I think I actually called up the center and asked to speak to Dr. Delerma, or something, you know, something like that. But I don't know how it happened, but next thing I know is I'm actually at the center looking at scores by Hale Smith and Ole Wilson, and they had some Nina Simone arrangements in there. They had Duke Ellington arrangements in there. But there were all these contemporary composers, Wendell Logan, I mean, names you may or may not know. Very important black contemporary composers. And that was really gratifying to me. There was a concert with a black female conductor, K. George Roberts, later on in the week at the old Chicago Symphony Hall with the Center for Black Music Research Repertory Ensemble. And it was really, one of those moments walking home on Michigan Avenue late at night where it was this sense of calm, that there was a tradition. It wasn't a well-known tradition, but it was a tradition. And I think that it became important to me to kind of wrestle with, remember, it's Vanderbilt University. You always have it, I think, in an academic setting. You have professors who want the best for you, but they don't have the tools. So there were a lot of professors there who said, well, Daniel, if you really want to be a successful composer, don't talk about your blackness. Don't make it an issue. You know, be above it. I understand the context. And there were, you know, at the Black Cultural Center, there were people out there. Let me tell you something, brother. All right? Be proud. So
Johnson was, what was his name?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
tall guy, Ray or
Ray Winbush.
Ray Winbush.
Right.
What happened to Ray Winbush?
he's
Where is he?
I think he's working for.
I know. But
I don't think he's in the university anymore.
no, okay. He was a good man.
Yeah.
He was a good man. But I think that I made a conscious decision early on to try to wrestle with and balance those two things. And it's taken me now maybe close to 20 years to just start to get to that what I would call a moment of grace, where I realize that, you know, look at me. You know, because I'm looking at you. Do I look like a composer? Do I look like a classical violinist? You know, so by that I mean I'm really, and I had a discussion today with my friend about how much I allow the image to be used, how much I allow and accept the notion of how I play and how I look like, and the way that I look to kind of speak for itself and allow the audience to make, you know, their own assumptions. Now I have said, now there's a difference between being 26 and 36. When you're 26, when I was 26, I was much angrier. You know, I wrote a score where on the title page, it's a piece called Hip Hop Essay for Orchestra. Turn the page. Quote, for my niggas worldwide. End quote. Turn the page. Right. So that's 26 years old.
Right.
36 years old doesn't need to do that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So I've said things publicly that it's not that I regret them. It's not that at all. But it's my 36-year-old self looking back on my 26-year-old self and saying, hey, brother, you know, there's different ways to say the same things.
But I think the things that you've said that I've seen are very grounded, though. You know what I mean?
Such as?
Well, I think that well, there's one place that talks about your notes to one of your pieces that doesn't say "For my niggas worldwide," but says "Play it fierce and funky."
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. Now that's a big controversy in classical music right now. In classical music right now, traditionally score indications are written in Italian, piano con moto, right? Dolce, play sweetly, with motion, or with speed. Vivace, these are allegro. These are Italian terms. There's a big controversy. It's been going on for years on whether or not that's still necessary, because that has to do with publication. That has to do with, well, let me not go off on that tangent. Suffice it to say that it has nothing to do with the national identity of the composer. Now, this is important even in terms of Brahms, but I mean, it used to be about Verdi, the Italians, Brahms, German, and even the Brahms, there were the Brahmins and the Wagnerians and the Mahlerians. They were divided amongst themselves. There was the French movement, Debussy and Ravel. So there's a big controversy. If you're a composer in 2008, do you use English or Italian? And my estimation is that not only do I use English, but I use terms like play it fiercely funky, play it like a guitar solo that Prince would play, or something like that, with a Caribbean pride. Yeah.
But don't you, so then maybe,
you need the mic. Oh, sorry about that.
So that's political as much as it's an aesthetic choice.
That's political.
That's political. Right?
What do you mean by that?
When you decide that if a genre of music that you've situated yourself in might say, if you just cut your hair off and tighten that shirt up a bit, and that in fact you could ascend to the highest rungs of contemporary classical music, and say there's an orthodoxy over here, and then there's the orthodoxy of funk over there, and it seems like you're somewhere in between them with this idea that I'm going to choose not to follow this aspect of the tradition, right? Which means that there'll be some maybe some venues that may not host you, and some that would more quickly? Like, how conscious are you of the politics of those aesthetic decisions?
Well, there's another way to
Maybe
look.
I'm framing it.
No, I understand. To answer you quickly, there are people who have said and say that I've actually used my blackness to forward my career. And I would, now, the fact of the matter is, anybody who's in the music business knows that, believe it or not, it really does come down to the product, the music, you know. And with that I mean, if there's an audience for that product. So it doesn't matter if it's, you know, Britney Spears or Rihanna or, you know, Snoop Dogg, sexual, what's it? Oh man, I mean, that's a killer track. Sorry, I had to sneak that in. Have you seen the video? I mean, that is, I think it's the first track that he actually sings on with the vocoder. I think it's the first.
Did you see the making?
Oh man, oh yeah, oh. Sorry. No, but it's actually, you know, it's funny because I've talked about how I find Snoop Dogg to be a preeminent chamber musician. You see, I think that, well, I need to answer your question real quickly. In the music business, there's one thing that validates the product or the music. I'm sorry to talk about it in such a crass terms. It is the audience. If you have an audience, you're going to make a living, and after that, then you have to decide what is valuable to you. Okay. So that said, there are plenty of composers, peers, black and white and in between, who have said very publicly and openly that, you know, I'm a sellout and that I've used everything from looks to the way that I play as a way to break into the industry. See, so now that's an interesting notion, because really for me, I really am playing and composing and doing the things that I feel very passionate about. And they keep changing. Anybody who knows my music or understands what I'm doing understands that I am pulling from Philip Glass. Philip Glass embraced rock and roll music, and he's not a rock and roll composer, right? But he echoes, if you will, rock music. I'm not a hip-hop composer. I'm not a hip-hop artist, but I use hip-hop and rock and soul and African-American folk music in a way that echoes what I'm doing as a classical composer. I mean, this is a tradition in classical music, the same way Gershwin or Penderecki or who's somebody, well, I think Gershwin's a good example, you know, love him or hate him. So I think that, you know, race and now you said politics, and that's what was so interesting, because Bill T. Jones, who I understand spoke here, he says quite adamantly that all art is political. Swan Lake is political. Now, you understand what he means by that? What he's getting at, the notion that and we've talked about this, is that he's saying that an artist lives in the world, and the minute you express yourself, you are declaring a choice. You're drawing a line in the sand. Now, I don't agree with that, by the way. I don't agree with that.
I just find it interesting that...
I don't think... Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You need the mic again.
I find it interesting that coming up through the discipline, then to make this, at some point you had to make a decision about, do I say the Italian version of Play It Sweetly, or like, I want you to move whatever that, like, however one. It also means that you have a relationship with the other musicians that you're composing for, that they have an understanding of this vocabulary beyond the Italian set of phrases, that when you say whatever that thing is, that there's also some relationship between your musicians.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's where grace comes in. I think that, you know, what do you do when a Dutch orchestra is confronted with Fiercely Funky? What's their reference? So the reference is, have that violin in hand, speak to the conductor beforehand, and if a question comes up, play it. Because in front of 80 or sometimes 100 people, they are going to make a decision about you instantly. And one of the best defenses you have is that if you can actually play. It ends the argument, and it doesn't matter what language you speak. You know, there's a violin concerto that I wrote where it was a German violinist, spoke no English, an Italian conductor spoke no English. And they got to a point in the score, and she declared in front of the whole orchestra, this is unplayable. You're 5 years old, and you're supposed to go to lunch, and you hear this sound, and you see this thing, and you have to be in first grade to play it. So you go up to Mr. Miller, and you say, Mr. Miller, I want to play this. And he's like, well, you have to wait, and then you get it. No, I want to play this. Okay, well, come back tomorrow thinking, you know, 5 years old, he'll forget. And I come back tomorrow, and I want to play this thing. And I do everything that he tells me to do, religiously, everything. And then when you're 10 years old, between 5th grade and 6th grade, that summer, walking home from your drugstore job, I was a stock boy, walking home in the hot South Florida sun, and suddenly I realized, oh, wait a minute, I've been doing something like this for the last 5 or 6 years. What if I tried this? Oh, this epiphany. What if I actually made the violin into a drum? What if I actually said that, you know, I wanted my violin to sound like a bass? So hours of doing that, because all they teach you is pizzicato, and that's pizzicato, right? But what happens if you... What are the limits of the instrument? I want my violin to sound like an electric guitar. Because vibrato is... So, you know, I want my violin to sound like a turntable. What can a DJ teach me? I want my violin to be a bass drum, snare. Because that's me. That's me. And then you realize, well, you know what? I wanted to be a classical violinist. I wanted to play Mendelssohn. And you go to the academy, and you go into that machine. And everybody, you have to do it this way. And if you can't do it this way, keep doing it until you can do it that way. And sometimes the fingers don't want to do that. Sometimes the fingers will never do that. And then you realize, you know, Willie Nelson is a great singer, not because he's a great singer, it's because you recognize his voice every single time. You know? So how do you make, it's not even about, well, race or politics. It's about, Robert De Niro said on the Actors Studio, you know, it got to the point where I was only going to talk about the things that I know. So that's the thing. I'm only going to express myself in the instrument with the things that I know. Now, of course, to end this is expected now. You know, yeah. And I have to, and I have to be very careful that my mother, you know, Haitian, good Haitian Catholic woman, more European than African American. She says, Daniel, I know you're a composer, I know you're, you know, talented and all, but why can't you play anything nice? You know, why can't you play something for me? Color and race is an increasingly complex state of is an increasingly complex physical state to accurately describe in terms of its ascendancy, descendancy, and in terms of its origin.
Right.
You know, so, right. but I'm not even, you know, I'm not an anthropologist, but I'll give the example this way. Again, Robert De Niro, I think, is a good teacher here. This is what I know. A black person from Miami is different than a black person in Harlem. They speak differently. Pencil. There's a different intonation.
I think that the fact that you as a Haitian American who chooses to refer to himself sometimes as African American, that's a sophisticated racial analysis, and not everybody does that. You know, understanding the history of, you know, like we're in a moment where sometimes, often, people who are from the Caribbean will say they're Caribbean American. They won't say that they're African American.
Oh well, I say I'm African American of Haitian descent, right, or just Haitian American.
But that's a political decision.
No, you're right. Well,
that's a political decision.
But I want to. Well,
and it's
maybe
a racially informed decision, and you're making it's a process that you're arriving at. You're not just randomly saying I'm African American or Haitian descent.
Maybe you can say what you mean by politics or what you mean by political. There we go.
So you introduced it. You tell us, the answer.
maybe I can spend a little bit more time on the aesthetic
Back
side.
to the mic. We back.
Yeah.
So if I were to just kind of separate totally from the idea of where you from and how black that is, and just talk about the aesthetics of your playing, the timbre and rhythm and those things that there's a set of activities that you do on that violin that is related to these kind of specific cultural references, wherever they might happen to be geographically. And that set of aesthetics, I'm saying, is a political decision. And I don't know the sister's name who, there's a black violinist who got to play the very... Regina Carter. Have you guys talked about Regina Carter?
No.
You're a good friend.
Right. So you and Regina hanging out, and she's like, boy, they gave me hell over there in Germany.
Italy, yeah.
In Italy.
Yeah.
For this, because I wanted to play this music that wasn't of a particular set of cultural politics. Like, I wanted to play a music separate from the music that is normally ascribed to the Stravinsky. Is it the
Paganini?
What kind of violin is it?
Paganini. It was Paganini's Stradivarius.
Stradivarius. Yeah. So, like, her choice to then, and maybe Travis should be articulating this. Her choice, her choice to play a different music, a beautiful music, combine those musics. I felt that was a political statement. It was a declaration of kind of cultural agency and positioning, and that feels political to me. It feels like she's adding a new milestone in the legacy of classical music that says, you know what, black people were here, haha,
and I would, right, and you're very, very articulate in what you're saying. When Daniel Bernard Roumain was invited back by the Israel Philharmonic, I can't remember exactly which concert it was, but he specifically programmed the Parsifal Overture by Wagner. Now that was a major step that he took in trying to reassociate the Israel Philharmonic with the music of Wagner, because during the Second World War, obviously, and post-Second World War, there was a long period of time where the music of Wagner was not going to be played. I think that what I like most about 2008 is, what does it mean for me to play the first piece I ever played publicly, Hatikva? That's the Israeli national anthem, Hope, right? Now, what does that mean for me to play it? And don't read the bio, you know nothing about me. What does it mean to walk out on a stage, I think it was in Iowa, Hanshaw Auditorium. No, it's a wonderful, Iowa City, wonderful. And, I don't know, 500, 700 people. First thing that I played. Now, that's what I'm interested in terms of, then I can tell the story. So I'm 5 years old. And every year there were holiday concerts. Big red bow, crisp white shirt, shiny black pants, plastic shoes. Now, in Margate, Florida, there was an orchestra. Elementary school students, probably 100 of us. And if there was 100 of us, that means there was at least 200-300 parents in the audience. Now you got to understand South Florida. It's a gymnasium, the school's gymnasium. 6 o'clock at night, hot as hell. Air conditioning's probably not working. This is what I remember, right? Some of my female friends probably had a little bit of makeup on, and we were all sweating, we were all perspiring. But there were 100 of us, and we were together. This was my first concert ever. Now you got to understand South Florida. There's a lot of retired people in South Florida, right? And they go to every concert too. So added to those 200 adults are maybe 300 retired people. And they just come in and they mingle and they want to be a part of whatever the hell's going on, right? So that's the scene. Now, every year, Mr. Miller would choose one student, and only one student, to play Hatikva with the orchestra. And that was a very special thing. I didn't even know what the hell Hatikva was. All I knew was that I wanted to be that person, right? And unbeknownst to me, I was going to be that person. So, middle of the concert, I see my mother. Concert stops, and Mr. Miller says, now, I'd like to introduce Daniel Roumain to play Hatikva. And I moved a little closer, you know, and I started doing my job. And, you know, I looked out, looked up, and there was my mother, right? And she's looking at me with her Haitian pride. And I'm doing my job, doing what I think is right, playing Hatikva. Well, next to her was an older woman, white woman. I remember her vividly. And, you know, a Haitian woman, Haitian mother, seeing her son doing his job in front of so many people, well, she began to cry. Right? And in doing so, this older white woman saw my mother start to cry, and, well, she started to cry. And they embraced each other. And one by one, you know, people kind of picked up on this. And nobody really knew what was going on, but it was very emotional. And pretty soon, more people were crying. And of course, me being 5 years old seeing this, well, I started to cry. And that started a maelstrom of sweat and tears. Suffice to say that at the end of it all, there was a standing ovation. And I thought, wow, this is what music is? Now, the thing about the story isn't my mother. It's not even me. It's that woman. Because that was 30 years ago. Was she a survivor? You know, was that why she was crying? Is she still alive? I don't know. But I remember her. And every time I play Hatikva, I remember her. And that's the story, you know, because I remember Mr. Miller saying to me the next day, you know, Daniel, you're either going to have to serve music or have music serve you. Pick one. And I never knew what he meant. Many, many years later. So I'm either going to serve music or have music serve me. And now I understand what he means by that, because this was a very selfless man, very talented violinist who somehow decided he was going to teach young people in South Florida. Now, politics is, statistically speaking, every black man in this room under the age of 40 is supposed to have been something or is supposed to have gone somewhere, statistically speaking. We are all supposed to have participated at least one time in our lives in what we'll call some sort of deviant behavior, statistically speaking. Now, never happened to me. What's the reason? I would like to think it's the violin. So when I say music changed my life, I really mean music saved my life, you know? And those are the kind of politics that I want to forward. Those are the kind of ideas I want to forward. So sometimes I'll say to an audience, am I allowed to play Hatikva? Even more than that, is there a Palestinian national anthem? Shouldn't I be playing that as well? So, you know, that's where I want to go in terms of, you know, politics.
But in speaking of politics and race and music, I'm just pretty hung up on the whole Italian thing and the way that you describe how to play your own compositions. To me, historically, yes, you can say like, oh, Italian, like there's some sort of national racial delineation on how music's supposed to be played, but it's almost like a standardization, and it allows for interpretation in that when, you know, you have a marking like vivace, it has a specific time signature, you know, it's, you know, like at, you know, 120 beats per minute or something like that, right? But
that's right.
In what you describe your music in my opinion, doesn't necessarily have that sort of room for grace or interpretation, to use your own words, because when you ask someone to play fierce and funky like Jimi Hendrix would play his guitar, to me that's just so culturally informed that it's almost impossible, like that woman said, to really understand what you mean. So what's political, I think, about your music is that it is exclusive, meaning that for once, I mean, I feel like we've been speaking of classical music as white music, although we haven't really said it explicitly. But to ask someone to play music like a violin, like Jimi Hendrix would play his guitar, it excludes people. And to me, I think that's what's political about your music.
Well, no, that's a very brave thing. Let me, okay, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
I mean,
Please keep going.
I think it's I think it's certainly possible to like look at the obvious sort of like racial ethnic markers, like I am, you know, an Asian woman playing the Israeli national anthem. Like it's obvious that there is some sort of, you know, there's a difference, right? But to sort of speak of music and discuss music in such strict sort of physical, I mean, you spoke earlier of how there are blacker people in India than some black people that you've met. To speak of music in that sort of sense to me is, I don't want to say it's incorrect, but I feel like
You can say it.
it's a digression, I think, because
Yeah.
to speak of music and to speak of politics means you have to speak of music primarily, you know, and I think that's why I'm drawn to the way you described it.
It's very important that you have those beliefs. And it's very important for me to challenge them. And it's very important for you to understand that a musical composition is an artifact. It's not just artistic or musical documentation. It is cultural documentation. It's very important for you to understand that Dolce arrived on the scene, and it means nothing. Dolce means to play sweetly. That really means performance practice. And it's very important that academics in the academy play by their own rules. George Crumb in 1963 wrote a string quartet called Black Angels that was used in the movie The Exorcist. And at one point in the score, he asked the first violinist to play the note G and increase the bow pressure until you achieve pure noise. So, that's a tradition now that a lot of violinists use. It had to start somewhere. And as a composer, and as people, students, other performers, people who are supposed to covet and shield and forward the notion of culture, we must decide that we're not going to not allow certain performance practices to come in and other performances not to come in. Why? Because of sloth-like laziness. Beethoven in his Fifth Symphony, the trombones wait, and they wait, and they wait, and suddenly, da da da, dun 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 dun. And what's important about that moment is not their entrance, one of the first in classical, four Fs, quadruple forte, quadruple forte. So, as a composer, if Gershwin says jazzy, we must be willing to say in classical music, we are going to accept and learn from composers the way we always have. And as a composer, if I say to play something funky, not only will I write, but I'll record, and I expect a student, another musician, to understand and learn the tradition. Because look, the fact of the matter is, you know, that's what culture is. If culture can only be replicated by the people involved, then it will die, right? And Elvis and Eminem and so many other people have already proven that there can be, you know, that to me is when a music becomes truly sophisticated, when you can represent, that's my job as a composer, to write music in such a way that if you're from the Netherlands, you can play it fiercely funky. And I will be there, just as Beethoven was, to show you how to do it. But we have to be very careful, I think, when we say, this is allowed, but this is not. Because what I would say is, you know what, there is a performance practice. There's a way to play Bach. There's a way to play Beethoven. There's a way to play Brahms. There's a way to play Stravinsky. There's a way to play Penderecki. Why can there not be a way to play Roumain?
But I don't think it's that cut and dry with classical music. Like, you know, when you play Schubert, when he puts two Fs, that could mean anything. Like, I feel like there is this sort of interpretive quality of any particular music, and the way that I see four Fs is like how we measure the length of this room. Like, it's a measurement, you know, and I think, I'm not necessarily criticizing your method of describing music or how it should be played necessarily, but I just think it's, and not to say exclusion, well, I shouldn't say this here, but
No, of course you
can't
can. No.
necessarily be a bad thing. I mean, I just think to create a way for people to play music that is exclusive to people who come from a particular cultural background.
Wait, can I?
Yeah, no.
Thank you for this is really important.
And I'm going to try not to go into professional mode, but I want to get you to think a little bit about what exclusivity has meant in the history of classical music. Anyway,
No, I understand.
prior to this, and so I mean, there are a lot of ways in which those things were exclusive codes, as Daniel was pointing out, at other points in time. But they came because people tried to understand them at some point. They came to have an explanatory force that wouldn't seem so exclusive.
Right, no,
But,
I get that.
but these were, but all those things were the province of European elites for a very long period of time. So,
Oh, male.
they were exclusive then.
Yeah,
Are we saying right now that classical music is white music? And like, I just feel like we're sort of tiptoeing around things that
No, classical music is still elite music.
Right, but what's elite? I mean, I just feel like we need to.
In terms of how it's supported, but I should be.
Well, no. Classical music, look, Eddie. Let's look at it this way. Most rap music is made by a certain type of person. Let's say. Let's look at it that way. Let's look at it from another point of view, right? How about polka music? How about salsa music, right? So any music has its proponents, has its majority, right? Has its majority who are involved. But that doesn't mean that someone from outside of that majority can't participate. No. And by participate, I don't always mean by playing by those rules. In other words, if you look at the season for the New York Philharmonic, most of the music for this season, the next season, and every season will be by mostly male composers, mostly white male composers. So that's a type of aesthetic. That's a type of aesthetic. Now,
Do you think it's problematic that you can sort of align an aesthetic with a race?
No, because I don't think it's problematic, because what is important to me is that I am creating music that operates within that aesthetic and goes beyond that aesthetic. And that in of itself is part of the tradition of classical music. There was a time when classical music did not acknowledge the contributions of jazz composers. There was a time when classical music did not acknowledge the contributions of Asian composers, Chinese or Japanese or anything else. There was a time when classical music did not deal with electronics, and over time, classical music embraced an electroacoustic tradition, a Pan-Asian tradition, and even an African tradition, right? And it's important that classical musicians, I think all musicians, and that's what it means, that's what 2008 means to me. 2008 means to me that there's a certain rigor in trying to learn a language. It's just a language, And there was a time, now it doesn't mean you're going to become an expert. I don't expect a young white Japanese woman to become the next big hip-hop sensation. But it's not outside the realm of probability.
Right, no, I get that.
And that's very important.
I just think that I feel like it's a sort of exclusivity that makes it powerful, though. The entire industry, if we want to speak about hip-hop, that honestly, that it's almost impossible for, a young Asian woman to go break into the hip-hop industry. To me, not to, rag on young Asian women, but,
well, but
I just feel like there is something very powerful about that. I'm all about inclusion and stuff, but that political power of music comes from the fact that certain people own it, or there is that sort of ownership. Or maybe that might be wrong.
Yeah, but remember, this young man wants to, please.
I think we lose sight of the question, and I think what she was trying to say as far as, when we associate music, certain races have that label, I think, to certain, I guess, when it comes to classical music, at times, or I think this can be an icon, I'm not sure, whatever, but when we think of classical, it's associated sometimes with white and stuff like that. Now, and I think, I'm not going to say you're kind of colorblind to the fact, or I'm not sure, you're seeing it that way or whatever, but I think when you look at certain music or whatever, like jazz, for instance, and hip-hop and stuff like that, you see, or you associate with African Americans.
Yeah, but there's something that's really, I want to make very clear here, because it's very important to me. I'm working with a drum player. Her name is Makoto Ikuchi. She is the hottest young hip-hop drummer in New York City right now. She's Japanese. She's phenomenal. Phenomenal. So I want to make it very clear that there was a time when I believed these things were culturally specific, that the best jazz players in the world, they had to be black. I don't think that way anymore. But let me explain why. If a language has a certain viability or validity, it has a certain amount of translation, meaning that it would be as though we have to be very careful not to say that the only scholars of the Italian language can be Italians, you know, because then and I can see I'm trying to rile you up. Okay.
I think we kind of going to the left with the question or whatever. I just want you. This is what I want to know from you. So what you're saying is you don't associate race with certain types of music.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I think the question came from me wanting to use, let's say, Ebonics in my not just English, but okay, let's say English in a certain. I think the question centered on me using English in my scores, descriptive terms in a particular way, descriptive terms that describe certain African American aesthetics, right? Funky, fiercely funky. See now somebody assigns right. See, and what I'm saying is, okay, let's break it down this way. Dolce in a musical score is no different. You know, there are American composers like Ned Rorem who say, play it like a lullaby. Okay? Now that's devoid of, I would like to think, race or even culture, but play it, okay, but let's say, play it like a lullaby. So, you know, and the melody is. So when you say play it like a lullaby, that gives the performer information. And what I'm saying is play it like a Southern lullaby, or play it like a 200-pound black woman singing to her Negro child. And it's a challenge. No, but this is where the art comes in. That means that the performer has to grapple with the intentions of the composer. And that's a very important part of classical music. I want the performers to grapple with what I'm trying to say that is very culturally specific. Because that's Dolce, that's play it like a lullaby. It's absolutely no different. Now, whether or not you assign exclusivity to it or racial overtones to it, that's fine. But I'm saying I'm operating within the tradition of classical music. Classical music has always used descriptive terms. By the way, classical music has always used non-musical descriptive terms. Always. So you see it as something that is maybe a threat to the tradition of classical music, and that's fine. I don't need to use
I think it's awesome. I think it's
okay.
No, I think it's, what I see is that, you know, just in speaking of Jimi Hendrix, it's like, that's very specific to a certain sort of sound. You know what I'm saying? Like, even like a 200-pound black mother singing to her Negro child, that's a very specific sound.
Yeah.
Like, there is no interpretation. There is no grace. I mean, to a certain degree, there is a subjectivity, which I think is what Grace's artistic ability is, that you are allowed to do those sorts of interpretations. But I think it's really cool that only certain people may have access to that sort of sound. Like, you know, and I understand that, like, the success of, like, you know, the legacy of a certain, you know, art form and that sort of thing. But I think it's incredibly powerful that only certain people truly understand what that may sound like.
I think it's more powerful that you'll communicate what it sounds like to people that aren't necessarily of that aesthetic.
Yeah.
It was just sort of along the lines. You said you weren't an anthropologist. My background's in anthropology. So just as far as like viability, I wonder how viable it is if you say, play it like a 200-pound black woman to a Negro child. to say the Dutch Symphony Orchestra. Like it feels like you would have to be there every time to do that. So it doesn't seem viable to me because if they say play it like a lullaby, I feel like there may be some space for translation and that person's original work can come through. But if you say play it like Prince,
You said they have no frame of reference.
there's no frame of reference unless you're there.
The answer there is that, you know, every tradition kind of begins with the artist. Before Beethoven, there wasn't that sense of the Beethovenian gravitas, the weight of it. And what Beethoven had to do was he had to be steadfast in his belief that this is what he heard. And what happens is other performers believed in him, other conductors. And this has always been the case, and this is the case, is that Hip Hop Essay for Orchestra is played every year by the Memphis Symphony by the same conductor. And every year, you know, there may be new members in the orchestra. But as your reputation grows, I mean, look, I am quoting a very well-known American composer, Prince. And if you know anything about Prince's music, you know his style. You know, maybe you even know the contrapuntal nature of his style, the complex nature of his style, symmetry of his style, the symmetry in the form, even the avant-garde nature of his style. Right? But the fact is, how did that happen? It happens over time. It happens and it happens with patience, and I think it happens with perseverance on his part. So now we have a tradition, a Prince-like style, that other people can emulate. You see, so that's what we shouldn't lose here. I'm not famous, and I'll probably never be on MTV, but within the world of classical music, remember, I can notate everything I just did falls within the realm of classical music tradition. I'm just using the vernacular of the language. So this is the glissando, and this is just grace notes. And I have to really believe in myself and the patience and the perseverance that that sound, to me, sounds like Miss Logan, you know, my landlady, 80 years old, and I'm living in her brownstone. And that's her struggle. Alicia Keys' first moments in the world that we know of her is the Moonlight Sonata, those three notes, Beethoven. And then she begins to talk over it, and it becomes one of these kind of recitatives, or, you know, these little theatrical moments. But the first notes we hear from songs in A minor, which is a reference to Songs in the Key of Life, I think, and she's a big proponent of Stevie Wonder, is not hers, it's Beethoven's. But she's, what Henry Louis Gates would say, she's signifying on it, right? And I think that, I mean, you're very, I mean, I want to really come back to, I don't think we disagree, I think we agree more, but I think it's very important that it's not just a novelty, and it's not just a trick, it is science. You know, it is science. They say that they want more, classical symphony orchestras want a more diverse audience. I live in New York City, and I can tell you, when I go to see the New York Philharmonic, I can count how many people of color are there. It's very, very sad. And you want to know why? You want a diversified classical music audience? Play diverse music. It's as simple as that. Play diverse music, you know? But if you only play a certain type of music within a certain era all the time, you won't get there. And that's where I want to go. I would like to see, and by the way, of course, oh, yeah.
What's the word? Breaking the paradigm or whatever. Whatever. Hey, bring me a Coke, please. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, more power to you, bro.
I'm wondering, I don't want to make an argument yet, but I have some questions. One is, well, not yet, so you can't disagree yet. How much do bodies matter, especially today?
Bodies?
Bodies, in terms of when we talk about packaging and performance and music, all right? I mean, you're talking about, okay, you compose a piece of music and you want it to transcend, you know, class, race. You want somebody to be able to pick it up and play it, and it sound like what you wrote, you know, and they're capable of playing it and playing it well. I'm wondering how much an audience's perception influences what's called clean aesthetic or accurate performance. Say I want to go hear, you know, some great classical music. I want to hear some good music tonight. I want to hear and see a 45-year-old white man stand on stage with a violin and play this particular song, and that's good music to me. Somebody gets on stage and the song doesn't sound like the one I want to hear, it's not good music to me. Somebody gets on stage and they don't look like the person that I want to hear that song from. I'm missing part of my experience as a listener. I'm missing something as an audience because you're there instead of him. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that does have to do with packaging and reception, and I think it's more important now with today's technology and the way that we receive entertainment. And music is also entertainment. It's art and it's entertainment too. I'm entertained by a certain thing. Here's an argument. You might end up on MTV.
I think you will end up on MTV.
And there's a chance. and I will venture that part of the reason, besides being a great musician and playing what you play, that you'll end up on MTV is because you look the way you do too.
Oh, sure.
And I think some of what you play might be received differently, and some of what you notate, fiercely funky, might be received differently if you looked differently as you wrote that and notated those instructions. That's my argument. So I guess here's the political piece. I guess I'm asking to what extent bodies matter in that sense.
Bodies in chairs in an audience?
No. Both.
I think
I was more thinking about his physical body.
Physical presence.
And
as a performer.
Well, he already said he's going to use everything he has and is to get what he wants.
Yeah, let me.
Well, you know, but if bodies matter to a certain degree, then it'd be impossible for
let me describe it this way. I really do want to be brief because I can tell things are hot now. I went to Vanderbilt University, and I always say I've been largely motivated by fear. I have my own production company that handles everything that I do, and that production company has relationships with a PR company and a booking agent, and it's a very I'm very lucky and grateful, but there's a lot of hard work. My very first few days at university, I realized that there's no career development office, that it was not my teacher's responsibility to get me to where I wanted to go, that it was sacrilege to talk about art and commerce in a typical academic conservatory setting. This was a liberal arts college, but it was the same rules apply. And that is, in this country, it's different in Europe. In this country, that is by and large the same for most music majors. Go in the practice room, study your art, take your auditions, and hope for the best. I mean, that's a generalization. There are exceptions, but that's the world that I went into. And I started seeking out models. Lee Iacocca had written a book at the time. You see what I'm getting at? I started looking at mom and pop shops. I started taking tort classes. I went to the business school because I read Ani DeFranco's bio, Medeski, Martin and Wood's bio, Prince's bio, Philip Glass, big model for me. And I started realizing that the best thing I could do was be an artist full-time. I wasn't interested in teaching, because I wasn't interested in teaching, but the odds were completely against me to be able to make a living as a composer, not as a producer, not even as a performer, but as a composer. I didn't really have many peers. I mean, I still don't in that sense, and it's actually quite sad, and I'm trying to do something about it. So the fact of the matter is, I started gigging a lot. I started working with other musicians like Edgar Meyer, and they were the Wooten brothers. Oh, do you know Victor Wooten on bass? I mean, well, Bela Fleck and the Flecktons. I mean, they were a whole realms of Nashville-based musicians who made their living playing. And when I got to the University of Michigan, I realized that I was in actually real trouble because I was either going to have to go to LA, Chicago, or New York if I was really serious about my career. And you have to understand, like most, the university is a very comforting place. It kind of inoculates you from the realities of the world. And you form these umbilical cords, multiple umbilical cords, I think. And it's, especially when you're a grad student of color, they're going to hang on to you as long as they can, you know? So I made a decision that I was going to do my master's in 1 year, do my PhD in 3 years, and do a detached study. In other words, get the hell out of there as quickly as I could. And I went to New York City, and I started playing piano, and I gave myself 3 years. If I can't make a living as a composer after 3 years, I'll go back to New York City and go back to working for Two Live Crew and, you know, the things I was doing down there. And something happens when you do that, you know. It wasn't about a girlfriend or a wife or a family, and I still don't have those things. It was about the career. And I started DBR Music Productions because I started realizing that there was power in LLC, just in terms of liability. I went to a volunteer lawyer for the arts. I really started looking at the business of the performing arts. You know, I took a lot of night classes, and all the while playing piano, doing little things on the side. I had my own little group. Suffice to say, last year DBR Music Productions was chosen as one of the top 40 businesses, well, top 40 under 40. It's a very prestigious list where, you know, Swizz Beats, they pick people out of New York City, top 40 businesses under 40 years old. And DBR Music Productions made it based on our gross income, I'm very happy to say. And, you know, I'm still a little bit hesitant to speak in these terms in an academic setting because I still feel like, well, you know, it's supposed to be about the art. But the fact of the matter is, classical music has a wonderful tradition in terms of classical composers and their relationships to publishers, classical music impresarios, you know, everyone from Glenn Gould to Columbia Records. I mean, there's a whole, this is to answer your question. I made a decision that it was very important that I be able to talk about the performing arts and the business of the performing arts. And not to shy away from it, not to be ashamed of it, and to say it in a way that if you want to make music for a living, you can do it. And you have to identify your audience, and what sacrifices are you willing to make? Ani DeFranco and Jay-Z share a lot in common. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, go find out. Because they both sold records out of their cars. And the thing about that is that, you know, it's truly unfortunate that a lot of young people don't realize that every year 135,000 bachelor's of music degrees are given out in the United States. Every year. 135,000. There is no way every one of those people are going to be able to get a job if all they want to do is play in an orchestra, or all they want to do is do chamber music, or what have you. You have to create your empire. You have to create. So more than bodies, I think that, yes, I found a way to capture somebody's imagination. I mean, not to name drop, and I feel like I'm in a living room with friends, but I just did a photo shoot for Esquire magazine, okay? Well, no, you don't have to, no. But the thing about the photo shoot is that the whole thing is they wanted to pick who they think is the next, quote-unquote, big thing in all the, you know, in punk music. I'm the classical music guy. And these things are frowned upon by certain people in the classical music industry, even though Josh Bell and other people do it all the time. So I think that, you know, truly successful people understand not only the bodies that are in the seats who show up, but they cultivate an audience that understands their work. You know, Jimmy Buffett always says, I only have 1 million fans, but they always buy my records. Sometimes 2. But you see what he's getting at? He's always going to go platinum. He doesn't need 10 million people every year. So I think it's very important that, you know, I wish Making the Band 4 spoke more about those things. There was an episode, it used to be when P. Diddy got so pissed off because they didn't know the words to a Biggie track. Do you remember this episode? And he started talking about the history. And that was ethnomusicology 101. That was ethnomusicology. And then it became something else. It's something else now, unfortunately. But the fact of the matter is, I think that young artists of color, especially, have an opportunity. The most famous classical pianist in the world right now is Lang Lang. And it's a huge thing because he's Chinese. The most important conductor in the world right now is Gustav Dudamel, who's 26 years old. And it is from the Sistema, the system in Venezuela. He is the next Leonard Bernstein, you know? So to me, and by the way, when I went to that concert, that concert was like sold out. Half of the house was Latino. It's amazing. You know, so I'm sorry, I said I was going to give brief answers. I hope this gives a sense of, you know, what a wonderful world Louis Armstrong it really is right now. Because, you know, Will Smith, I used to hate Will Smith.
I love him.
No, I used to think Will Smith was an Uncle Tom.
I used to.
Let me explain why. I saw Will Smith on a Barbara Walters interview, and he said, you know, being black in Hollywood is great. It's so fresh. When I did Enemy of the State, it was supposed to go to Tom Cruise, but when I was in there, me and Gene Hackman, man, me. Boom, next episode, next segment, it was Denzel. I talked about being black in Washington is really hard right now. Not enough black people in the union, not enough black scriptwriters, not enough black people on the crews. It was those two ideas, right? And by the way, 25 million, 15 million per picture. I hated that notion. I hated first Grammy in rap music. You talked about this. Will Smith. I mean, I saw it as a total sellout of what I wanted hip-hop music to be, man. NWA, right? Total sellout. No. And I'm saying this in front of, all we got is you and Trisha Rose and Nelson George. I mean, black, you know. But the thing that I am hopeful for now is I see the brilliance of Will Smith. I see the fact that he is the biggest star in the world, and he's the biggest action star in the world, and he's the first black action star to be making that much money. Do you realize he's going to become the highest grossing Hollywood entity of all time? He's going to surpass Spielberg and Lucas in terms of gross, the movies making up. I mean, when that happens, it's going to be huge.
And he's been doing
it's going to be
other rappers say they want to do.
That's yeah. But I think
they want to be in movies.
I think it's I told one of my musicians who is very much into punk music and very much throws what I call daggers. Don't define yourself by defining others. Oh, Will Smith is this. You know, I used to have this whole thing against Jesse Norman. I'll tell you, Jesse Norman, Wynton Marsalis, Bobby McFerrin, they were all less than black. Bill T. Jones. Because I didn't feel like they weren't black enough for me. They weren't out there helping people. Young people's concerts, I live on 119th Street in Lenox Avenue. Used to be Heroin Alley. Wynton Marsalis doesn't go to 119th Street and do young people's concerts. It's not that simple. I don't need to define anyone else. I can define myself. So if you define yourself by defining others, that's very 1998.
Play it out.
And that's what I mean by kind of you have a hip hop generation kind of racial analysis, and I think that we see that in Barack's campaign. People don't know how to deal with that. You know what I mean? It's a really forward racial analysis that's not defined by an old tradition on either side. It's not it's not a way of being traditionally black, but it is and it isn't. It's not what Deborah Dickerson calls the end of blackness, but it is and it isn't. You know what I mean? It's a different way of being, and I think that you're describing this, and I think you're really at the forefront of really understanding it. And I don't know if it's because of. I mean, I think Jay-Z does it. And I wonder if it's because of the way that this generation kind of interfaces with the marketplace also. I wonder if that has something to do with it.
Well, you know, I think that we are living in interesting times. And I think that, you know, Barack, that's a very, I'm assuming blocks.
Down the street.
Okay. So and I just heard something about his house and the lot next door and all these things. You know, I think that Barack is a very easy target for this discussion, and it's fine. It's very interesting. But I'm also very much interested in the responsibilities of a successful minority in an underrepresented field. I have a certain amount of success in classical music, and I think it's very important that I not lose track, as I was saying before, of recycling that compassion. And part of that is leading a life of grace, because I feel that you know, I'm going to remember you. You know, that was a moment of grace. You know, I can remember being at Vanderbilt University, sitting next to a beautiful, beautiful blonde-haired, buxom Jennifer was her name. What did I say?
Books.
Well, she's beautiful, beautiful. Actually, we're still good friends. She lives here in Chicago. She's a medical doctor now. She teaches at Cook County. But we had this professor, an older gentleman, and he would always look at her a certain way, almost like an appetite. Well, this is, oh, look, women have a very different perspective of college life than men, I think. I'm not a woman. But, you know, it's very different. The same way I think there are two New York cities. A young woman in New York City has a very different perspective of Harlem even than I do. You know, so I'm really interested in how can I look at things from a different perspective. So Jennifer and I had this teacher, and he would look at me a certain way. You know, and we would talk about this. And I remember years later, I wrote a song called Segregation Song. Now, in Segregation Song, I was thinking about Jennifer, because she talked about how it felt like when he would look at her, just the look was enough that it made her feel like her body was being ripped, you know, from limb to limb. And it got a little more sinister, you know. Our grades got affected. There were things said in class that were inappropriate. I mean, there was real action to the look. But I remember, I wanted to be loved by you. I wanted to be loved by you. I wanted to be trusted by you. I wanted to be trusted by you. I wanted to be sitting right next to you. I wanted to be loved by you. I wanted to be sitting right next to you, but separate from you, equal to you. Hear me now. Sometimes I feel like they might tie me up, chain me up, drag me down a dirt road, hanging out from the back of a pickup truck. And as the pieces of me are ripped from my black body, and these times I do believe in my own segregation. I wanted to be loved by you. I wanted to be trusted by you. I wanted to be sitting right next to you, but separate from you, equal to you. Hear me now. Sometimes I feel like they might tie me up, chain me up, drive me down a dirt road, hanging out from the back of a pickup truck. And as the pieces of me are ripped from my black body, in these times I do believe in my own segregation. Sometimes I feel like they might tie me up, chain me up, drag me down a dirt road, hanging out from the back of a pickup truck. And as the pieces of me are ripped from my black body, and these times I do believe in my own segregation. I wanted to be loved by you. I wanted to be trusted by you. I wanted to be sitting right next to you, but separate from you, equal to you. Hear me now. So Segregation Song was, you know, it wasn't, yeah, thank you. It's a weird thing to applaud it. You know, now, you know, I mean, believe me. What's your name?
Liz.
Liz. What's your last name?
Platt.
Platt. Liz, I'm assuming Liz Platt. Well, what do you think? I mean, what do you think of that song? I'm interested in what you think of that song.
Can you, what do I think?
What do you think of it?
Yeah.
Did you hear the words?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. What do you think it's about? What do you think it's about?
Well, the image certainly, it's very like American history, image out of American history, the pickup truck and Confederate flag on the back or something. So I certainly hearing it wouldn't associate it with a white woman getting nasty looks from her professor.
Right, and that's the thing about the song for me. It was about James Byrd. It was about that incident in Texas. Recent history, not ancient history, but probably ancient history too. And it was about Trent Lott. Remember, Trent Lott lost his job. Remember that whole thing? Couldn't believe it. Nobody could believe it except we knew, right? But it also was and is about Jennifer. In other words, it also is about, the way that she felt. Because I remember when we were at Vanderbilt, I know exactly how you feel. Yeah, I feel that every day. So on the one hand, it's a very kind of easy song for me to play in a place like, Miami, Florida, for a particular type of audience. But I've played that song in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the audience is stunned. And it's a way of saying, okay, we're going to have a conversation tonight. And I want to be honest with you. And the best way I can be honest with you is to let you know how I feel right now, being in front of you. Absolutely vulnerable. Absolutely exposed. You're just, I feel like you're going to rip me to shreds, And some of you maybe do have Confederate flags, but you're not, but you're not racist. But you have, No, but it's a way for us to really talk with one another, And a song like that, followed by Hatikva. See, I asked you because, oftentimes someone who isn't black, I assume they're uncomfortable. And now, later on in the concert, I did that once in a concert, and we had a Q&A afterwards, and the woman, she said, you know what? I felt like you were threatening me. Well, now, you see, so that's, when we say political, now, when I'm at the when I was at the Library of Congress, invited by this, Smithsonian, at the end of the concert, they very much wanted me to play one of their violins, a Stradivarius, $3 million. $3 million. And they bring it out, and there are two officers. There are two officers in the white gloves, and they come over and they put the instrument in your hand, and I'm describing the instrument to the audience, and of course I say, and ladies and gentlemen, this instrument has recently been played by Joshua Bell, and it's valued at $2.85 million. And you have to say that, $2.85 million, And then of course I played, probably Amazing Grace, whatever. And whenever I finish something and I finish, well, I had this habit. I go, like that. And I went, probably gave it an extra. just And again, it was that moment of, that's what I do. It's like, remember the Tiger Woods commercial? And he's, that's just something, I don't want to say that's black or not, but, you become very comfortable. That's right. So the whole thing, and I'm not trying to pick on you, Liz, at all, but, I remember I'm really fascinated. When you live in New York City and you sit on the subway, have you been in New York City?
I live in New York City.
Oh, you live in New York City. Oh, okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you look at somebody too long, that's a threat. It's a threat. And I still have a hard time getting used to that. Something happens on a subway. Maybe it's because we're too close to one another. And I like to say sometimes if I let my beard grow a little bit and maybe, put my hair a certain way or maybe change my clothes, I become a threat to those who don't understand. And that's why I'm so interested, because to me, depending on my look or my posture, this is all performance practice, I like to say. When you go to university and you're going to do a violin recital, I've seen a lot of violin. I've seen violin recitals in Taiwan, in Singapore. They all start this way. People clap, you come out, take a bow. And I remember at Vanderbilt University, before I did segregation song, meant to be loved. I mean, oh yeah. And you know, there's a humor in it now, but at the time when you're 22, I believed it. All that rage. And I had, you know, professors say, well, you're not allowed to do that. Not allowed to do that. Now, I have a certain amount of success. Young people will say to their fathers, you're not supposed to do that. And, you know, this is horrible to my mother. She is everything dignified and French. This is the savages do, you know. She really doesn't understand that part of me. But it's more than just being allowed. That to me, and it's more than just political. And it's more than just black. That has to do with, you know, I think everybody in this room has had those moments and those feelings where you feel victimized, you feel exposed, you know. I'm interested in that. Everyone in this room has had that person who comes and comforts them. Oh, poor diable. It's like Creole for poor baby. Poor diable, you know, where your mother or your father or your lover, you know, will say to you, it's going to be all right, you know. The Academy talks about timbre in terms of the sound of an individual instrument based on the wood and the resin. For me, timbre is the sound of your lover's voice. You know, when you were, I don't know, 20 years old and you would save their message on your answering machine. That's timbre. And I think that as much as Dolce, you know, I really appreciate you coming out tonight because these conversations, these challenges, you know, Liz, you know, that kind of, what is your name?
I'm Yenny.
Yenny. I mean, that's so beautiful, you know, and Daniel, Travis. It's beautiful, but in a different way, you know, and I really think it's important that I could so easily just be the victim, or be the young, angry black artist, but I would much rather talk about and not forget Jennifer, and not forget whoever that woman was sitting next to my mother, and not forget Hatikva, you know, and that to me, that's transcendence, that's grace. And I know we're supposed to talk about race and politics and all these things, but, you know, Lenny Kravitz, who I've come to really appreciate, you know, he talked about love, yeah. Final question.
You keep saying that you read Latin grace,
yeah.
And I'm wondering how that translates, because like when I was with my grandmother, Vivaldi, that's what I listened to. I love Vivaldi, but they didn't offer that in my school. I listened to Vivaldi because I had some of my family who had an interest in it. So I feel that, you know, a lot of African American or minority kids don't not listen to classical music because they hear it and don't like it. They're not exposed to it. So I'm wondering, you know, you have your organization and you with your Life of Grace. What do you do to expose children who don't have a dad, you know, who listen to your music? Like, how do you take your music to schools, or how do you?
Can I just add on to that? I want to know what your definition of grace is, because to me it sounds very Buddhist.
It just sure. I was in Taipei, and I went to a Buddhist temple, and to see 500 people with their books, you know, da na 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 na, and the notes. Everybody knows the melody. This went on for hours. All they had were the words. Everybody knew the melody. Can imagine if, I mean, imagine if that happened in this country. You know, 500 parents would go somewhere. I mean, we have our Sunday masses and our Baptist church, but it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same. It is different, and I appreciate difference. I taught at the Harm School of the Arts for 3 years, and I remember, it's so funny how you said that. I remember there were a lot of guardians. No mom, no dad, no grandma, no guardians. And I remember this one child in particular, he held me, he said, God, you smell the way my dad used to smell. You know, things like that. I do a lot of master classes. I mean, I don't want to prove myself to you. A lot of it's on my website. And no, I do feel that. I don't talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it tonight. But I try to do as many master classes with young people, a lot of juvenile detention centers. I was a JD grad. You know, I don't say that necessarily proudly, but I'm not ashamed of it. And I think that I take it upon myself to, well, even tonight's You know, there's a lot of artists who don't want to talk about what they do. They don't have the time or they don't have the patience, which is fine. I don't mean to criticize them at all. And we're over time, so, but I want to talk to people because I want to know what they think. I want them to keep me honest, as they say, and I certainly want to be the thing I used to be most afraid of was I'm a composer because I was more afraid not to be. Along with that, maybe even more, I want to be relevant because I'm terrified of being irrelevant, you know. And there will come a time maybe where I'll play the violin and it won't mean anything. But by grace, I think I mean simplicity. I think I mean honesty. I think, you know, there's something alienating, by the way, about it. It's angular. It's, you know, there is, and as much as the young people may dig it, yeah, you know, there might be a whole troop of people in the room who are threatened by it or just don't like it. My mother would not like it, you know, and a lot of her friends wouldn't like it either. That's why I think grace, it doesn't have to be, you can't be all things to all people. But I think if sometimes, you know, 3 notes can allow people to come in, you know. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you.